official. The president is disinvited to give the State of the Union address. Michael Cohen says he will not testify before lawmakers because he says the president and his lawyer threatened his family. And revolt in socialist Venezuela. A new man steps before crowds of protesters, declares himself the interim president, and the United States and Canada stand in support. First, the State of the Union address is canceled. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, just told the president and all of us that he is not welcome until the government is reopened. This began about an hour and a half ago when President Trump wrote a letter to the Democratic leader explaining he does plan to deliver the annual speech in front of Congress as scheduled. That letter reads in part, "It would be so very sad for our country if the State of the Union were not delivered on time, on schedule, and very importantly, on location." Moments ago, the Speaker answered that letter with one of her own, saying she will not consider a resolution that authorizes his address in the House chamber until the government is reopened. So now what? John Roberts reporting live from the White House. Where are they going?
Well, I don't know. It's yet to be seen. But clearly, I mean, this is all couched in very parliamentary language in this letter that Nancy Pelosi sent the president just a short time ago after the president sent Nancy Pelosi this one. Forgive the highlighter. It's the way I keep my notes around here. But the president is not welcome in the House. As again, it's couched in parliamentary language. But she's basically saying you're disinvited. And I can't ever remember that ever happening where a Speaker of the House told the president, you can't come up here and give the State of the Union address. So now the president has to decide, okay, well, if we don't open the government and she can't get what's called a concurrent resolution before the House, both the House and the Senate, by the way, have to pass concurrent resolutions to authorize a joint session of Congress in the House of Representatives. So that's what she's blocking as opposed to saying you're not welcome up here. So now the president either has to see if he can go over to the Senate and deliver it, or maybe he might deliver it from the Oval Office, or maybe, as we were hearing yesterday, he goes to some location outside of Washington, D.C. and delivers it. But the president, in his letter to Nancy Pelosi, basically called her bluff on this issue of security. Her letter that she sent to the president on January the 16th said, hey, listen, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Secret Service, which are the lead agencies in protecting the State of the Union, have been unfunded. At that point, I think it was 26 days. Now we're on to 33 days. And there are concerns about security, to which the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Secret Service said, well, she never talked to us about that. We're just fine. So the president in his letter said, there are no security concerns regarding the State of the Union address. Therefore, I will be honoring your invitation. I look forward to seeing you on the evening of January the 29th. But now Nancy Pelosi saying, no, you won't. So now we'll wait and see what the president comes up with. But I do know, Shep, that they had a number of suggestions on what the plan B should be. One included some sort of an address on the border. Another one was a campaign-style rally before a couple of thousand people. I'm told neither of those things will happen, but the White House still playing its cards very close to its vest as to what exactly will happen in the wake of all of this.
And trying to get the big broadcast networks to cover it while not in that particular venue will be their challenge, because we know that's what they want. Another big story breaking, Michael Cohen, who now says he had volunteered to testify before a committee of Congress and now says he will not because of threats to his family.
Yeah, and this should come as no surprise, because last week his former attorney, now turned PR person, Lanny Davis, one of Bill Clinton's former attorneys, is one of his clients. So the president is saying that the only threats that Michael Cohen feels are he's threatened by the truth. But the president has tweeted on many occasions about Michael Cohen. What he tweeted last week, which has been cited by people who have talked with Michael Cohen as sounding threatening, was a tweet in which the president said of Michael Cohen, lying to reduce his jail time, watch father-in-law. The president has tweeted on occasion about Michael Cohen's father-in-law, but this idea of watch father-in-law, I think Cohen took to be some sort of a threat, like watch out father-in-law. I don't know if it was meant that way, Shep.
All right, John Roberts at the White House. Some background on what Michael Cohen's attorney is saying about postponing this testimony and the alleged threats to Cohen's family. Rick Leventhal is here with the details on this. It seemed to be about that matter regarding his father.
Well, we don't know what these threats are that Michael Cohen is talking about. And as I do in these situations, Shep, when there's a story about Michael Cohen, I called Michael Cohen, and it went straight to voicemail. So I don't have any information from Michael Cohen himself about what he's so concerned about, what these threats against him may or may not be. He did say that his attorney said he has to put Cohen does his family and his safety first. So what are the threats? So we just don't know what the threats are. But the statement said that it was as recently as this weekend, the president and his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, made threats that Cohen was concerned about. This weekend, Rudy Giuliani was on Jake Tapper's show on CNN. And the two of them went at it for a bit. And I'll let you hear what he said on Jake Tapper's show.
He should give information maybe on his father-in-law, because that's the one that people want to look at, because where does that money? That's the money in the family. And I guess he didn't want to talk about his father-in-law. He's trying to get his sentence reduced.
Well, okay, that was obviously the president, and I believe that was on Judge Jeanine's show.
But that was specific.
Yeah, talking about this father-in-law. Yep. So, I mean, is that it? We don't know. We don't know.
All right, second question, and that is, the testimony here is going, whenever it happens, will be quite limited.
So here's the thing. Michael Cohen was supposed to speak to Congress, supposed to testify to Congress on February 7th. And this week we learned that he didn't want to answer a lot of questions. So he was not willing to testify about any investigations related to President Trump. His testimony would exclude any matters, including that involved the Attorney General of New York, that involved the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, and that involved the Office of the Special Counsel. So he wasn't going to answer any questions about any investigations involving his former boss. All he would talk about were some anecdotes that involved working with him. So that's all that he was going to speak about, before we heard today that he was concerned about his safety and wasn't going to speak perhaps at all. If he does speak, it has to be before March 6th, because that's when Michael Cohen goes to prison for an estimated 3 years.
All right, Rick. Rick Leventhal, thank you. Let's get reaction from lawmakers. Ellison Barber's up on Capitol Hill. What about it?
Hi, Shepard. Yes, so we just heard from the chairman of the Oversight Committee, the committee, of course, that we did expect Cohen to testify in front of this next month, as well as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. In a joint statement, they said this, quote, "We certainly understand the completely legitimate concerns for the safety and security of Mr. Cohen and his family members in light of the attacks last week by President Trump, and again this past weekend by his attorney, Rudy Giuliani." The weekend reference and the last week reference there seeming to suggest that the concerns are over what both John and Rick have discussed, the threats related to Michael Cohen's father-in-law. But lawmakers here aren't giving any additional details on that either. The pair then went on to say in that statement something that we've heard Democrats say often after the president tweets about Mueller or the special counsel investigation or anything related to Russia investigations. They say that the president should not make statements or take any action to obstruct Congress's independent oversight and investigative efforts. Not a whole lot of Republican reaction just yet. We have reached out to some Republican members on that Oversight Committee. Congressman Jim Jordan, who is the top Republican on that committee, we reached out to his office. They were holding off on speaking just yet, instead passing us over to the spokesperson who speaks on behalf of the now minority on the Oversight Committee. But in the past, Congressman Jordan expressed skepticism about this Michael Cohen interview in general. Take a listen.
Their first big hearing, they're bringing in a convicted felon who's the star witness in the Mueller investigation, and yet they're going to have him in an open hearing environment answering questions of Michael Cohen, which I think is strange.
Other Democrats were waiting to hear from the Oversight Committee before they would speak with us on the record. They were saying they would talk.
That's the State of the Union address. That's canceled. But can the president move it somewhere else, say somewhere else in Washington or down on the border or in a stadium somewhere, and it still be the State of the Union address? Some of you are arguing vociferously that it can be. As it turns out, meh. Chad Pergram is our main man up on Capitol Hill, is our senior producer there. I guess this is a matter that is technically and for the moment unclear.
Right. This is an extra constitutional question at this point right now, Shep. The term State of the Union resides in Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. It just says the president has to provide this information from time to time. And as we've discussed in this space the past couple of days here, President George Washington came to Capitol Hill, initially gave the State of the Union. They stopped that process in the early 1800s with Thomas Jefferson. Woodrow Wilson rekindled it in 1913. Now, the question is, if the president goes elsewhere, is it in fact a State of the Union? It wasn't until Franklin Delano Roosevelt used the term in 1934, and then it was formally started to be called that in the mid-1940s. Now, here's the other question. Some people have started to chatter here on Capitol Hill. What happens if the president comes to the Capitol next Tuesday night and says, I want to come speak? Well, first of all, the House of Representatives has to be in session. And as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi indicated earlier today, they have to pass a concurrent resolution between the House and Senate for the president to come into the chamber and speak. Now, he has floor privileges in both the House and Senate. And what I have right here, this is the House rule book. Now, I should look at this, rule number 4 in the House. It lists who is able to come into the House chamber and speak. The president, who is able to come into the House chamber, I should say, that's a very important distinction, Shep. And the president is one of them. The Librarian of Congress, the architect of the Capitol, heads of departments, foreign ministers, governors of states. But at the end of the day, even if President Trump comes up to the Capitol, he cannot speak without that concurrent resolution. And Nancy Pelosi, when she returned to the Capitol just a couple of moments ago, said that's not going to happen unless the government is open. Now, Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, he just announced that he was going to submit a concurrent resolution. The House doesn't have to take it up. And here's the other question. Here's some concern that they have on Capitol Hill. Do you remember in 2016, in the summer of 2016, they had the gun sit-in? They wonder if the president might come into the House chamber and try to have a rump session with just Republicans and have Republicans try to stream this live on their cell phones.
Huh. And then there was the time when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, if I'm correctly remembering, and the
August of 2008.
Yeah, the Republicans were talking about gas prices. Gas prices were too high. And
right.
She just kind of ignored it and let it happen.
She looked the other way. The House was not in session. Republicans came into the chamber each day, held a rump session. The House was not in session. Technically, that was a violation of the rules, but House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the summer of 2008 looked the other way.
But if she shuts it down and says there's no activity going to be happening here, there's nothing into which he can walk.
That's right. I mean, he's certainly welcome in the Capitol, and you would have all the logistics. He could come to the House chamber. The rule book is silent. I looked it up. If he can come into the chamber if the House is out of session, it doesn't say anything about that. But he cannot speak before the House and Senate in a joint session of Congress unless both the House and Senate have approved that concurrent resolution. That is the key here, Shep.
Imagine they hold up a cell phone and he talks into a cell phone and they stream that.
Well, that's what's starting to get people very concerned here if they go down that route.
Okay, might as well get the whole circus in town. Thank you, Chad. Appreciate it. Now, there's another thing that's happening right now. The president was going to have a get-together with conservative leaders to talk about the shutdown and, do some talk about what it is their next moves are going to be. But that's closed to the press. Not unusual at all. A lot of events at the White House are closed press. This event is closed press. But you know who the decider is? The president's the decider. And he's just made a new decision. The cameras are allowed in. So in a moment, we're going to hear the president and conservative leaders giving their take and maybe their thoughts about how to take on the shutdown and maybe thoughts about how to end the shutdown. The Democrats have said, look, this is solid. We won't talk to you, now Nancy Pelosi says, about any business, none at all, until the government is reopened. That's it. And unless constitutional legitimacy. Canada just did exactly that. But breaking now, the crisis in Venezuela just took a brand new turn of global significance. Moments ago, Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro said that he no longer recognizes the government of the United States, will no longer work with the United States. He has ordered United States diplomats and United States persons to abandon Venezuela immediately, and all of that must happen within the next 72 hours. The 35-year-old new man is the country's main opposition leader, and he just swore himself in as president. He encouraged thousands of Venezuelans to flood the streets today to protest Maduro, who began a second term earlier this month. It was to last 6 years. And these are the pictures out of Caracas, where the people have come out by the tens of thousands. Countries around the world, including the United States, consider Maduro's election a fraud and Maduro himself a dictator. Venezuela has sunk deeper and deeper into a years-long recession under Maduro, one fueled by an oil crisis and hyperinflation as his government prints more and more money. These are live pictures now. The new leader has made his way to a microphone. The International Monetary Fund predicts inflation in Venezuela will hit 10 million% this year. To put that in personal, everyday terms for the people, Bloomberg News has been tracking the price of a single cup of coffee in Venezuela. Over the past year, Bloomberg reports it has skyrocketed from half a bolivar, which is the local currency, to more than 800 bolivars, like going from 50 cents from a cup of coffee to $800. That's made wages essentially useless in the country. People say it's hard to buy anything, food other than basic necessities. Hospitals report they're crowded with malnourished children. The poverty rate has forced more than 3 million people to leave the country. And now the new leader is put himself in position. The elected leader, though by fraud, says the United States, has said we're breaking off relations with the United States. United States persons must evacuate immediately, and there are questions about whether the military might step in. Steve Harrigan is reporting live with the news. He covered Venezuela extensively for this news network for the past decade. Is there a possibility now? Is there a suggestion that the military might still be with Maduro and that he might be able to arrest this new leader?
Shepard, that's been how the government has done in the past. That's how they've stayed in power. Keep in mind, just 2 years ago, there were similar demonstrations against Maduro. His government killed 120 of those protesters on the street. They threw the leaders in solitary confinement and basically were able to cling to power for 2 more years. Are they able to do that now? Some things have changed dramatically. First, you have this 35-year-old, relatively unknown Juan Guaido. He's the head of the National Assembly. He's declared himself president interim of Venezuela. He can't have the Supreme Court do it. That's because the Supreme Court are all backers of Maduro. And he's gotten United States backing, but more than that, countries are lining up and they are splitting. Mexico going for Maduro, the U.S., Canada, Argentina, down the line going for the new guy, Guaido. So, to put it simply, there is uncertainty. You have 2 presidents in Venezuela, and at this point, it looks like both sides are digging in. It's uncertain, and it could be potentially violent, Shepard.
The United States has been backing this new man who has come forward now, ostensibly the opposition leader. What is the U.S. leverage, I guess, now, along with Canada and others?
Well, the Trump administration has said 2 things which I think deserve a lot of attention. First, that nothing is off the table. And second, that they will hold the Maduro government responsible for any actions against the Venezuelan people. So if they do round up the leadership, if they do slaughter the demonstrators, the U.S. is saying it will hold Venezuela responsible. If all options are on the table, that includes military options, but one of the most severe economic options would be oil sanctions on Venezuela. The U.S. is the biggest buyer of oil from Venezuela. That would cripple an already dying economy. That could be one move we see quickly against the Maduro government, Shepard.
Steve Harrigan with the insight there. Steve, thanks. We're going to keep live pictures on and watching here in our newsroom in New York. We'll be watching for breaking developments on a very, very tense situation there. And a live look at the White House. I mentioned we're expecting the president's meeting with conservative leaders in just a moment. He's opened this up to press, which previously they had said no press at this, but now the president has changed that order. And we will hear from the president and conservative leaders on the shutdown in just a moment. Meantime, the Senate is getting ready to vote on not one, but 2 different bills that would end the longest government shutdown in American history. The problem is neither of those bills, one a Democratic bill, one a Republican bill, neither of those has the support necessary, we believe. Let's get to the chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is up on Capitol Hill. Two votes on Thursday, right? Tomorrow.
Absolutely right, Shep. Votes on 2 different measures in the United States Senate. The first one being the one President Trump offered over the weekend. It would trade some border security money for temporary protections for some immigrants. Democrats have already come out against it, so it's not entirely clear that it will get to 60 yes votes.
I plan to vote yes on the first one, which would be the one which is being offered by Leader McConnell. And then I plan to vote no on the second one, which will be the Schumer proposal. That'll be part of the positioning that we will find within the Senate to begin with.
Then there's the second proposal, legislation favored by Democrats here on Capitol Hill. It's a bill approved by the House of Representatives, would reopen the government through February 8th, does not include wall funding, and one independent senator says Democrats should hold the line.
We give in to the president today. We say, okay, it's only the little bit of the wall. It's not the whole wall. And there are some things for DACA. The problem is we've got a major debt ceiling vote coming up in March. We're going to have budget votes over the next 2 years. Is this going to be the way he does business every time?
Some leading lawmakers suggest the way out of this is to keep adding to the pot, if you will, keep putting items in that people here on Capitol Hill want approved, so somebody feels like they get something out of this final package. Shep.
Mike, up there on the House, what are leaders saying about all of this?
Well, they're very anxious. Obviously, they've been trying to get a way out of this. They've been voting on individual government funding bills, and the majority leader basically said he's watching to see what the Senate does.
We are hopeful that the Senate will vote to open up the government of the United States. I think they're going to reject the president's plan because the specifics in it are very negative and ought to be subject to further negotiation.
Meanwhile, a leading Republican is critical of Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
She literally rejected an offer that hadn't even been presented to the nation for at least another 7 minutes. That shows you how unserious she is. She is not serious about solving this crisis. She's not serious about reopening the government.
Senate vote scheduled just the day before furloughed federal workers are due to miss another paycheck. Shep.
Mike Emanuel on the Hill, thanks. Waiting for that presidential meeting with conservative leaders. I mentioned they did, in fact, allow the cameras in. We're expecting that any moment. Again, that's on the partial government shutdown, which could now affect when you get your tax refund. That's according to the reporting of the Washington Post. Last week, the administration ordered tens of thousands of IRS employees to get back to work to process the funds without pay. But union leaders tell the Washington Post that hundreds of workers have the okay to skip out during the shutdown. And they expect more people to call out as part of a sort of coordinated protest against the shutdown. Fox Business Network's Christina Partsenevelos is reporting. She's live in New York City.
Yeah, the skip out is in reference to hardships, that is in a clause within their contract. Hardships also meaning financial limitations, because you have a lot of federal workers that are saying right now they don't have the money to fill up a tank of gas to get to work. They also don't have the money to pay for childcare, so they're opting to stay home. And that's the reason why the Washington Post is stating now that there's about hundreds that are actually using this exemption. However, the IRS won't say exactly how many people won't show up. And we know tax season starts, so tax filing, on Monday. So what does this mean for you? Americans watching right now, you have to file your taxes. You could potentially be facing long wait times on the phone, because right now the phone services are down, but they're expected to be up next week. The taxpayer assistance centers are expected to continue to be closed. And then those that often file first, those are ones that are expecting returns. There's a huge possibility that you will have returns. Why? Because only half of the staff has been called back. And just to put it into context, last year, they literally went through 154 million returns with 6 million refunds, averaging about $2,089.
And remember, at one point there was a suggestion that we'd be able to file our income taxes on a sheet of paper about this size. And then as things move forward, for a lot of people, Christina, it's actually going to be more complicated this year, huh?
Yeah, it is. Because it's funny because you and I actually spoke about this months ago, and I took a sheet of paper and said the new tax forms are going to be the size of a postcard. So that's number one. You have a different form, or many different forms, that some people are going to be unfamiliar, so they're going to have questions about that. And then you also have, within 2018, the new Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that came into effect. So, of course, people are going to have questions about this. So the big, I guess, warning is, should you be filing ASAP right away so that you can get ahead of the long lines and queues on the phone? We still don't know, though, according to the IRS, how many people are going to protest and use this hardship clause within their contract to call out and not go to work.
Christina Partsenevelos, thank you.
Thank you.
We've just gotten new information from the White House. Here's how this works. The president has an event. They notify the White House pool. The event gets set to start, and then they say, okay, White House pool, come in. That means all the cameras come in, the president starts to speak, information begins to flow. That has just happened. So they're in there now, they're speaking now, the cameras are there, and in a moment, not sure how long, it's up to the president how long he wants to talk and allow those around him to talk, but once that's finished, we'll get that video played out for you, and we'll bring you that in just a minute. Right now, the House Oversight Committee, of course, newly, is led by Democrats. Oversight does the investigation. And this committee is investigating the security clearance process at the White House and within the Trump transition team. The committee released a list of names that includes White House advisors and, significantly, the first son-in-law being questioned specifically. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington for us. Hi, Catherine.
Well, thanks, Shep. According to the media release from Democrats on the committee, the investigation seems limited and targeted, focused on nearly a dozen current and former administration officials. Some were dismissed or resigned for cause. Others were pursued by the special counsel. The grounds were not evidence of coordination with Russia during the campaign. The most high profile include the current National Security Advisor John Bolton, the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner, as well as the former National Security Advisor whose sentence for lying to federal investigators in the Mueller probe is still pending. The focus is on alleged mishandling of classified information and other breaches. The statement reads in part, quote, "The goals of this investigation are to determine why the White House and transition team appear to have disregarded established procedures for safeguarding classified information, evaluate the extent to which the nation's most highly guarded secrets were provided to officials who should not have had access to them, and develop reforms to remedy the flaws in current White House systems and practices." The letter also alleges the White House is currently defying federal law by failing to provide Congress with information about its security clearance practices. For context, if you remember last summer, the White House said it was exploring whether they could pull security clearances for former senior intelligence and Justice Department officials, which they did in a very dramatic fashion for the former CIA Director John Brennan. Critics of the White House said at the time it was retaliation for speaking out against the president and his policies. Here's the White House press secretary on the issue from last summer.
Any benefits that senior officials might glean from consultations with Mr. Brennan are now outweighed by the risks posed by his erratic conduct and behavior. Mr. Brennan has a history that calls into question his objectivity and credibility.
We've reached out to the White House and House Republicans for their response to the Democrats' investigation. And if we get an update, we'll bring that to you, of course, Shep.
Catherine Herridge, thanks. There is breaking news now. The president has just made news. I told you that the White House pool was called in, the president there with conservative leaders, about to discuss the shutdown, and all of a sudden, what does he discuss? The State of the Union address. And what does he say? The State of the Union address is canceled because she is afraid of the truth. It's canceled because she doesn't want to hear the truth. She, from President Clinton, his lawyer Lanny Davis sent out a notice saying, look, he feels threatened by the president. Would you see this as a legal move, as a political move, some combination, or what?
It's a theatrical move. It's a dramatic move, as what we've seen from the White House. There's really no legal significance. It doesn't help the president's defense, nor move the ball forward at all for Mr. Mueller. But what I think it does show is the president not wanting anything negative being out in the public. Right. And the last thing he wanted was someone like Mr. Cohen, who knows exactly where the skeletons are buried for about a decade of doing work with the president, to actually get before a microphone. Right now, everything's been filtered through legal documents, much more antiseptic. It's different for the American public to see him and to assess on their own his veracity.
Now, in a legal setting, for instance, a courtroom, were someone to threaten a witness, that's a crime. Is what happened here a threat against this witness before a congressional committee? And if so, what is that?
There's two ways to look at it. One, objectively, would a reasonable person feel threatened? And then there's the second part, the subjective. In other words, was Mr. Cohen, did he feel threatened? Clearly, the second part is yes. I was a prosecutor in New York. I was a prosecutor in Chicago for over a dozen years. So I've heard my fair share of people getting threatened in wiretaps not to testify. I've never seen it sent out to 50 million people before. That's a unique one.
This was a threat in your estimation?
I think any reasonable person would have to view it as such. What else is it? If it's not a threat, what else is it? When you say look out for the father-in-law, which, again, the president has known Mr. Cohen for 10 years, maybe there is some substance there, but that doesn't matter. Why else would you say that but to stifle Mr. Cohen from testifying?
And if the goal was to keep Mr. Cohen from testifying or to urge him not to very strongly, and now Mr. Cohen is not going to testify, then how might Congress react, and would the Congress have any sort of remedy here?
Not a remedy for the threat right now. That may be a component of Mr. Mueller, but I don't think that tweet in and of itself leads to any criminal liability. Congress has two choices. They cannot do anything because this was a voluntary appearance,
right,
or they could subpoena Mr. Cohen. But again, going back to your initial point, even if they subpoena Mr. Cohen, there's going to be no revelations there. It's anecdotal at best, which, again, mildly interesting and probably some humorous anecdotes, but not really legally significant.
But they couldn't subpoena him to give testimony on the subject at hand, on the facts of the matter, because that might be an interference with the Mueller investigation.
Well, technically they could, but I think they're definitely going to defer to Mr. Mueller and not have a witness under oath testify about things that Mr. Mueller may want him to testify about at trial someday.
Yeah, and you wonder if Michael Cohen is, I mean, he might be on a witness list, but you wonder if they'd ever call him, if they wouldn't just use what they already have, given Michael Cohen's history.
He does have a problem with the truth. However, most flippers, let me rephrase that, all flippers have a problem with the truth. The question is he corroborated by any documents or other witnesses? And we saw that with Mr. Gates in the Manafort trial, and Mr. Manafort's going to jail.
Yeah, and remember, most of what has been cited here, it's our understanding, is not from Cohen testimony, not from what Cohen has told them, certainly not singularly, but from a bringing together of all of the evidence. Remember the raid on the office of the apartment and all the hotel room and all the rest. They got lots and lots of documents, and somewhere there's a safe as well. Jeffrey Kramer.
I think that's correct.
Yep, Jeffrey, thank you. Thank you very much. I've been telling our viewers the breaking news continues. We're waiting at the White House. What's that? 2-minute warning. So in 2 minutes, we'll have the playback. We know President Trump has said one thing. We know President Trump has said the State of the Union is canceled. And we know he has said it's because she can't handle the truth or doesn't want to hear the truth. And the she to whom he refers is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. John Roberts is out in the yard. John, this was unexpected, but not surprising.
Say it quite the way Tom Cruise said it to Jack Nicholson, but basically he was saying she doesn't want to hear the truth, and it's a shame that the State of the Union was canceled. The president also went on to say she's canceled it. It's a great blotch on the incredible country we have, a very negative part of history. I'll let the president say what he said about Nancy Pelosi, but he didn't seem very surprised. And I think that the strategy of him giving that letter to the Speaker of the House was, I'm going to call your bluff here on security. Nancy Pelosi initially said it was because of security concerns owing to the government shutdown that they couldn't have the State of the Union. The president said, well, DHS and the U.S. Secret Service, who are the ones who are in charge of security, said there's no problem, so I'll see you on Tuesday night, to which then Pelosi had to say that she wasn't going to allow the House of Representatives to consider this concurrent resolution to allow the president to use the House of Representatives chamber. So now it becomes, I think, pretty starkly political, Shep.
Yeah, so here's what's about to happen. The president this had been previously scheduled. The president with leaders from the conservative side of things, what they were going to do is on the schedule for today for the White House. We get a schedule every day. It said they will have discussions on the closing of the government, and it said closed press, and the president said open press, and here it is. Interesting, right?
Very much.
There we go.
Very much for being here, and a lot of friends in the room, a lot of great friends. And Mr. Vice President, thank you, and Secretary Nielsen, thank you very much. We're doing a great job on the border, considering we don't have the tools. They don't give us the tools to work with, meaning we have to have a wall. We have to have a barricade of some kind, a steel barricade. It's already designed. We're building a lot of wall as we speak, a tremendous amount, and we're renovating a lot of the other wall. Otherwise, by the way, with what's coming up, because of the strong economy that we have, we haven't had an economy like this, I guess, in over 50 years. Would you say that's correct, Steve? And because of the strong economy, everyone's pouring up, and we're stopping them. But it's a lot of work. We have incredible people at the border, and you have to thank all of the Border Patrol agents and the ICE agents. I see in Long Island, they don't want ICE. The radical Democrats don't want ICE there because they're too good. They're doing too good a job. And I always talk about Long Island. That's one of the real hotbeds for the MS-13 gangs. And I just see this morning where the really radical Democrats don't want them there because they don't want to do anything to disturb MS-13. And when you think about it, MS-13 is about the most violent gang. They say one of the most violent anywhere in the world. And we're sending them out by the thousands out of our country. So we think it's too bad. But I would say this, that the State of the Union speech has been canceled by Nancy Pelosi because she doesn't want to hear the truth. She doesn't want the American public to hear what's going on. And she's afraid of the truth. And the super left Democrats, the radical Democrats, what's going on in that party is shocking. I know many people that were Democrats and they're switching over right now, and they're switching over quickly. So I hope they know what they're doing for their party. So far they haven't. If you know, I won the Senate, meaning we won the Senate all together, but we get no credit for that. They don't talk about that. They talk about the House. I didn't have any chance to, other than a couple of people, like from Kentucky, where I went and campaigned for Andy Barr, and for some others, they ended up winning their races, but I couldn't campaign too much, too many people. But we did a great job with the Senate, and people don't want to talk about it. I will say that the American people want to hear the truth. They have to hear the truth. And the truth is all about, and said, I think, and I hope well, we were planning on doing a really very important speech in front of the House and the Senate, the Supreme Court, and everybody else that's there. It's called the State of the Union. It's in the Constitution. We're supposed to be doing it, and now Nancy Pelosi, or Nancy as I call her, she doesn't want to hear the truth, and she doesn't want to hear, more importantly, the American people hear the truth. So we just found out that she's canceled it, and I think that's a great blotch on the incredible country that we all love. It's a great, great, horrible mark. I don't believe it's ever happened before. And it's always good to be part of history, but this is a very negative part of history. This is where people are afraid to open up and say what's going on. So it's a very, very negative part of history. I'd like to start today. We're talking about shutdown. We're talking about some conservative values. These are the great conservative leaders of our country, and they have very strong views, and we'll be doing that after the press leaves. But they have very strong views on the shutdown. And it's not that we have a choice. I don't think we have a choice. We have to make our country safe. We have done such an incredible job with such poor tools. We have catch and release, where you catch somebody and then you have to release that person into our country. We have so many different elements of rule and regulation. It's a very sad thing that's gone on, and this has happened over a long period of time. You take a look at the visa lottery. When there's a lottery, do you think they're putting their best people into those lotteries? It's a lottery. You know what a lottery is. Does anybody think they're putting their best people in? You have chain migration, where, as an example, the killer, the man who ran over people on the West Side Highway in New York, 8 people killed, 12 injured. And when you say 12 injured, nobody knows how badly injured they are. This isn't like they had a headache. This is big, big and horrible problems. Loss of legs and arms, and worse. And this man brought in many people, many, many people, through chain migration, it's called. So these are all Democrat principles that are no good for our country. They're hurting our country. And if we did what we had to do, you would bring crime down in half in our country, because so much of it comes through our southern border. Honduras is doing nothing for us. Guatemala is doing nothing for us. El Salvador is doing nothing for us. And we pay them hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But we're going to be stopping pretty soon. In fact, we're looking at it right now. We don't want to do it. Because when caravans form in the middle of a country, the country can very easily stop those caravans from forming. Very easily. I actually think they encourage the caravans because they want to get rid of the people from their country, and certain people. A lot of gang members are there. In the last caravan, we had 618 people with criminal records, and some of them very serious records. I won't soon forget the man that was interviewed where he wanted came into the country, the network person said, well, what did you do? And he said, murder, or something to that effect. And she goes, whoa, murder. Well, that's what we have. We have a lot of very dangerous people that want to come into our country. We're not letting them in. We want people to come in based on merit. We want people to come in that can help us successfully run all these companies that are pouring into the United States because of what we've done and because of all of the incentives, Steve, that we've given. And because this is where the action is. Steve Moore is one of the great financial gurus, and he would tell you how well we're doing as a country. But we have a lot of people that really we need. We have the lowest unemployment rate we've had in much more than 50 years with African American, with Asian American, with Hispanic American. We have the lowest unemployment rate we've had in the history of our country. And that's why when you look at the Hispanic polls, I'm up 19%. And the reason I'm up 19%, I don't even think it's the unemployment. I think it's the fact that they understand better than anybody what's going on at the border. And they say that President Trump is the only one that's saying it right, and he's doing what you have to do. That's why people were so surprised when they saw the poll that just came out, where I'm up to 50% with the Hispanic and up 19 points in a short period of time, because they get it better than anybody at the border. They know what's happening at the border, and they know it's a big scam. And the Democrats don't want to stop people. That means automatically massive amounts of crime, and we're not going to put up with it. So Nancy Pelosi, knowing these facts and knowing it's something that she can't win, that she just went out and said, let's cancel, for the first time in the history of our country, let's cancel the State of the Union address. And it's a disgrace. Just so you know, she uses on the basis of the shutdown, but when she asked me to make the address, formally in writing, most of you have a copy of the letter. When she asked me to make the address, she did it during the shutdown, well into the shutdown, by a couple of weeks. So the shutdown was going on. Now she's blaming the shutdown. So if it was because of the shutdown, why do you ask that the address be made? And she asked that the address be made during the shutdown. And now she's blaming the shutdown. She also knew, because she went to our people and she asked, would it be a security problem? She knew it wasn't a security problem. She blamed security, but she knew it wasn't a security problem. And she knew that loud and clear. And she went to the people. She asked, they said, we have no problem whatsoever. I just got back from Iraq. I was very safe in Iraq, and I felt very safe. We had great, great security. If we can handle Iraq, we can handle the middle of Washington in a very, very spectacular building and a beautiful room that we should be in, and that's where it's been for a very long time. So it's a sad thing for our country. We'll do something in the alternative. We'll be talking to you about that at a later date. But I have to say it's an honor to have these great leaders with us, and we're going to be talking about shutdown. We're going to be talking about other things, and we're going to be talking about, outside of this event that we just discussed, how well our country is doing, because we're setting records in so many different ways. We're setting jobs records. Right now, at this very moment, we have more people working in the United States than at any time in the history of our country. Think of that. That's a big, big statement. I just had a meeting on drug pricing and various other things, and prescription drugs, for the first time in history, the history of our country, have gone down in 2018. So for last year, just got the numbers, for the first time in the history of our country, prescription drug prices have gone down. They've been like a rocket ship until I got here. And we have more to do. They're going to go down further. But think of that. For the first time, I say it because you guys don't want to report it, but that's a big thing, because drug pricing has been very important to me, as is health care. First time in the history of our country, in 2018, prescription drug prices have gone down. That's a big number. You didn't even know that. I don't think anybody at this table knew that. It just came out. So we'll let you know it. So it's too bad with Nancy Pelosi what she's done. It's radical Democrats. They've become a radicalized party. They really have. They've become a radicalized party. I actually think they've become a very dangerous party for this country. If you listen to what they're saying, what they're doing, I think they've become a very, very dangerous party for this country. I think that Chuck Schumer, sadly, is dominated by the radical left, and he's dominated by Nancy Pelosi. Very strongly dominated. He can't move. He's a puppet. He's a puppet for Nancy Pelosi, if you can believe that. But that's what's become, and that's what's happening. And we're not going to let it happen to our nation. And we are not going to allow the radical left to control our borders. Because if they do, you will see crime, you will see drugs, you will see human trafficking like you have never seen ever in the history of our country. You will never see anything like what you would see. So we will never let the radical left control our borders. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, are you not giving a speech on Tuesday night?
We'll be announcing what we're doing.
Sir, she said it's not canceled, but that she wants to come to an agreeable date. So
we'll see.
You agree to a new date?
We'll see. Well, wouldn't be very hard, but that's not what she means, and it's very sad. I think it's a very, very bad thing for our country, and it's a horrible precedent. And we have many positive things to say, but we also have things that we want to turn into positives that are big negatives. The southern border is a very, very big deal. It should have been handled by other presidents for many times, just like Israel with the, if you look, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Every president talked about it. Nobody did it until I came along. Same thing in a certain different way with the southern border. It should have been stopped a long time ago. They talked about it. They had approvals for doing it, and they were unable to pull it off. Other presidents should have done this. We're going to do it. And it's not because I want to. It's because I have no choice. Because if we don't do it, this country is going to be worse than at any time in our history in terms of drug infestation and in terms of crime. And our crime numbers are really good, but our crime numbers would be very much better if we had a stopped-up southern border. And by the way, the caravan now, they're saying, is massive. The caravan that's coming up. Thank you very much, Honduras. We send Honduras hundreds of millions of dollars, and they send us caravans to 3 of those countries. And, you know, as I said, we're probably going to be stopping that. We're working on that right now. I would stop it because, you know, you have 2 theories. You can give more and let them do economic development, or you can do less. I'm of the less theory. I don't think we should give anything to them. And we've done this with numerous countries over the world where they're not treating us right. We have countries that get hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't even vote for us at the United Nations. Until we say we're not going to pay you anymore, then they immediately vote for us. So, you know, but that's not, I don't call that a vote. So I want to thank everybody very much. We're going to have a great meeting, and we will have a response to Nancy Pelosi in due course. But what she's doing to the American people, what she's doing to our Constitution is a disgrace. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
That man agrees with me. Steve. Thanks.
All right, you've been listening to the President of the United States. 33 days into a government shutdown, the State of the Union speech is down. It's not going to happen, at least in the House of Representatives. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is your world. We have never seen something like this in American history. We've seen a State of the Union speech that was delayed because of the Challenger disaster when Ronald Reagan was president in 1986. But no one was denying him the opportunity eventually to talk to the American people. So there is no precedent for what is unfolding here before us. A president denied by the Speaker of the House to speak in the House of Representatives, in the well of the House, as other presidents have. She arguing, of course, the government is shut down until it's open, then there will be no address. The president complying with that, but hinting of an alternative that could be in the works. We just don't know. This much we do. We are in uncharted territory, my friends. And doesn't John Roberts know it at the White House? Hey, John.
This has been 2 years of a presidency of precedents, and today was no different. The president describing this in pretty stark terms, saying it was a horrible precedent, a sad thing for the country. Then at the very end, they're calling it a disgrace, saying that he will have a response in due course. Nancy Pelosi has said they won't have this concurrent resolution for the president to use the House of Representatives to give the State of the Union until government is open. But I would think, Neil, that even if the government were to be open in the next few days, they couldn't find a, quote, mutually agreeable date that would put it back on track for Tuesday. So it really does sound like a State of the Union on Tuesday is off, which means now that the White House is likely going to go to Plan B, because they have said that the president is going to give an address, whether it be in Congress or whether it be somewhere else, to the American people on the 29th. I have heard that they've discussed several locations outside of Washington, D.C., so it looks like at this moment they will probably start the train rolling on the Plan B. But I've got to tell you, when we saw this letter from the president to Nancy Pelosi earlier today, I thought to myself, here comes the strategy to call her out, put the ball deep into her court, and see how she responds. The president, in his letter to Nancy Pelosi, saying, look, your original concerns about security are not a concern, so I'll see you on Tuesday night. To which she only had two options. One was to say, okay, we'll see you on Tuesday night, we'll have the State of the Union, or B, find some sort of parliamentary way of saying, we're not going to invite you. So now the president has the political victory of saying the Speaker of the House has, for the very first time in this nation's history, canceled the State of the Union address. And I think he believes he can get a lot of political mileage out of this. Neil?
Amazing. John Roberts, thank you very, very much. At Capitol Hill right now, where Mike Emanuel is sort of going through all of this. Mike, I guess it is a given then that a Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, does have the power to do this.
Neil, no question about that. You need a concurrent resolution between the House and the Senate to invite the president to deliver the State of the Union address. Most years that is just a formality. This time, of course, nothing is usual at this stage. And so after letters going back and forth between the White House and the Speaker's office, this afternoon, Speaker Nancy Pelosi explained why, in her view, Tuesday night's not the right time for the State of the Union.
Since government is shut down, we do not. Let's work together on a mutually agreeable date when we can welcome you to the Capitol to get rid of the State of the Union address. Government is still shut down. I still make the offer. Let's work on a mutually agreeable date, as the original date was mutually agreeable, so that we can welcome him properly.
Clearly, the Speaker is trying to put pressure on President Trump to reopen the government. Today, a leading Senate Republican said he's getting the sense at 33 days into this standoff that rank-and-file members are eager to cut a deal.
I think there's clearly some movement beginning. You know, we've been in a place where I think both sides thought they were winning. Yes. I think we're getting to the place where both sides think they're losing in terms of what the American people expect them to do.
But there are many sources here on Capitol Hill who say pulling the invitation from the president just adds to the toxicity up here, not ideal for getting a deal. Neil?
Mike, if the president opts for another location for a State of the Union address, I dare think few Democrats would go to that location to hear it.
I think you're absolutely right. Particularly in this environment, you get a sense that both bases are kind of looking at their members to see whether you have some spine or not. And so my guess is if the president were to go off campus somewhere, you would not see a whole lot of Democrats going to listen. Perhaps they would be watching you, Neil, to see what the speech is all about.
Wouldn't that be fun? One quick dumb question. Is there any chance, and obviously since you need sort of a joint, invite, that he just slips over to the Senate side?
Well, there has been discussion about that, but there's also some procedural paperwork you have to go through for that. The clock is running. The Senate tomorrow is going to vote on two different measures in terms of government funding, and so things tend to not move very quickly on the Senate side of the Capitol unless there's 100% agreement on doing something, Neil.
Mike, thank you very, very much. Mike Emanuel. Let's go to Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman. He has tried to find a middle ground on this to get those government doors open to avoid just the thing we're looking at right now. A canceled State of the Union speech, at least in the well of the House. Senator, very good to have you. Thanks for coming.
Neil, thanks for having me on again.
What do you think of this?
I think it's childish. It just escalates the partisanship we've already got in this town. And it's become a tit-for-tat thing, too. So, then the president cancels for airplane to go see the troops. We've got to all take a step back here and get back to actually doing the people's business.
But you're not, right? You're not. So I'm wondering what happens. I know we have these 2 votes tomorrow in the Senate, a Democratic measure or a Republican measure, likely neither to get the 60 votes needed. So where do we go with this?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the president's proposal will get pretty much all Republicans, including me. It's a good proposal. I mean, the president has put forward a plan that not only has the new barriers along the border that he wants, but it also has many of the priorities that the Democrats want in terms of border security, and it has this expansion of the DACA and the TPS group that the Democrats have been calling for.
Right.
So it really is an olive branch, and it's an opportunity for us to find some common ground. Tomorrow we'll probably sort of have a shirts and skins vote, but my hope is that there will be some amendments offered that will be bipartisan. I'm working on that, as you indicated earlier. I'm meeting this afternoon with a bunch of Democrats and Republicans, a bunch of us who realize this is not good for anybody. It's not good for the economy. It's certainly not good for the taxpayers, and it's not good for the families who are affected.
Who was in that group then, Senator, with whom you met?
Well, it's a lot of members who, have been public, so I can say some of their names. Tim Kaine, for instance, from Virginia, has been a leader on dealing with this DACA issue and the TPS issue. These are people that have a protected status right now. On our side, Lindsey Graham has been very involved, so is Lamar Alexander and others. So it's been just a group of members that have said, it's time for us to actually figure out how to find a way forward to get out of this mess. Shutdowns don't make sense. But the president's proposal on the border is very reasonable. What he's talking about is not 2,000 miles of a cement wall. In fact, he was never talking about that. He's talking about, in his latest proposal, 234 miles of barriers, including fencing for people, including some barriers for vehicles, and yes, including some steel barriers he's talked about that are pretty substantial. But it's in the areas of the border where everybody agrees it's needed. It's based on a plan that experts put together saying, what are the top 10 priorities for the border? Starting with Texas, where you've only got 100 miles of fence, despite the fact that it's 1,200 miles of the 2,000-mile border. So
you
I think
feel
it's a
the
reasonable
president's
plan.
made enough overtures that Democrats should respond. They heard funding for a wall and said no, even though the president's counter was security, and they said security, and they were both in agreement on that the wall was a fixation. So words mean everything, apparently.
Words do mean everything.
Let me get a sense from you.
Let me just say.
How long is it the issue with the wall? They were open, Democrats apparently said, to the $5 billion plus for border security, but not a wall. What's the distinction?
Well, first of all, the president doesn't have a cement wall in his plan. What he has is, again, various kinds of fencing. 234, well, it says barriers in the request that he made. 234 miles, not 2,000 miles. And he's doing it consistent with a plan that the Customs and Border Protection people have put forward that has been involved in both of the last appropriations bills, last year's bill and this bill, on a bipartisan basis.
No, you're right.
This plan makes sense.
Let's be clear then, Senator.
So that's where we are.
He calls it a barrier. You called it a barrier. Others have called it, security at the border. If he avoids the term wall, apparently, which sticks in the craw of a lot of Democrats, and to your point, same Democrats who voted for this earlier and under Barack Obama at least twice. But having said that, do you think that would get the monkey off everyone's back? Is something as simple as semantics?
It would help. It would help, because right now we're talking past each other. I mean, when you hear what the Democrats are saying, how they're characterizing the president's proposal, it's not accurate. But also, let's be honest, the way the president is characterizing it sometimes makes it sound like it's a wall all the way across the border.
Do you regret that the president, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, sir, and I understand that, but that attaching funding for the government, in other words, attaching this to potential shutdown if he didn't get his way, was the right way to go, that this has now set the stage that simply won't end?
Well, let me say something first about your previous comment. The president has used the word barrier repeatedly, and he has said repeatedly it's not a cement wall anymore. Now, at other times he's used the word wall. So he's sort of said both, and people have chosen.
Well, he might have changed it from cement to steel, but he was a little often using wall. And through the campaign, we ran just a few bites where wall came up.
Right.
You're quite right, though. He has shifted in that position. He has shown a willingness to do that. But Democrats are still saying wall. We're not going to do something with a wall. So how do you get around that?
Yeah. Well, I think you have an honest conversation where the facts are presented, which is that we do have an increase in people crossing the border. In the last 2 months of last year, we had more people crossing, actually twice as many people as the year before. We had a 50% increase in kids and families. So we do have an issue on the border that has to be addressed. He's right. The drug issue is very real. It's crystal meth. It's heroin. It is coming across the Mexican border. We also have issues